Good evening again. I'd like to call the Committee of the Whole for the Village of Cary for August 16th, 2022 to order with roll call, please.
Collier?
Here.
Cavelli? Here. Dudek?
Here.
McAlpine?
Here.
Weinhammer? Here.
Thank you. Would you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I did, because this is just a continuation of our meeting, correct? Because you can't vote on anything, right? It's not my first rodeo. I'm just kidding. Thank you. We'll move to the public comment section where the public is invited to make an issue-oriented comment on any matter of public concern not otherwise on the agenda. We have nobody here, so we'll go ahead and close that at 6:23. Okay. I'd like to remind everybody that Trustee Rick Walrath is attending the Committee of the Whole as a continuation from the Village Board meeting on Zoom due to a work commitment. All right, moving to the preliminary discussion regarding the annexation inquiry and residential planned unit development at the southeast corner of South Rawson Bridge Road in Hickory Nut Grove Lane. Brian, you got this?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. Item for discussion this evening is related to an inquiry for a property that's just on the outskirts of the Village of Cary. The property, for reference, is on the southeast corner of South Rawson Bridge Road and Hickory Nut Grove Road, kind of in the northeast portion of the village next to the Phosphorus Hills subdivision. The petitioner, which is present this evening, Mr. Gray, is representing Cornice and Rose International. He can give you some overview of the project, what they're looking to do on the site, and then kind of starting the development process before developing an annexation agreement and going through our zoning process for the PUD. Just some overview of the site from a planning perspective. The site does have some guidance within the village's comprehensive plan as far as the type of development that was anticipated for the property when the plan was adopted back in 2015. Specifically, pages 27 through 29 in the document, it does have a land use designation because it is within the 1.5 miles of our border. We're allowed to plan as municipality for any land that's outside of the jurisdiction of the Village of Cary within that distance. And the plan has designated this area as appropriate for single-family attached housing from a land use perspective. And also the plan does identify it as a future growth area for the village for potential for high-quality single-family attached housing or possibly multifamily housing. With the particular property, as you can see in the lower right-hand portion of the slide, there are some existing utilities that are in the area due to the Foxford Hills subdivision and the development of that property about 20 years ago. There are water and sanitary lines that do exist in the southwest corner of the subject property along South Rawson Bridge Road. To develop, obviously, the property as proposed, those lines would need to be extended to serve that property. There also would need to be, with the annexation of the site, would require the village to take jurisdiction of the portion of Hickory Nut Grove Road that is adjacent to the site. That property or that roadway is currently under the jurisdiction of the Algonquin Township Highway Department. So that would be a responsibility of the village to take ownership of that upon annexation. So that part of the discussions we've had with the developer previously on the site was looking at enhancing that roadway to village standards upon annexation. So the main discussions for this evening, the developer can discuss as far as the review process is. We're at a preliminary review phase just to discuss the project and see if it's something that the board would be open to or have provide feedback on the concept as conceptualized at this point, and should it be something the village is looking to pursue for that site, work with the developer and the team on annexation agreement for the property, and then proceed through the zoning entitlement process and village board approval of those entitlements. A couple items that we've looked at with the site due to the nature of where it's at compared to existing utilities. There will need to be some improvements that would need to be performed to serve the property or properly serve the property because it is lower in elevation than existing utilities in the area. So there would need to be, as part of the extensions into the property for water and sewer, a lift station may be required to connect back into the village to have things properly flow to our wastewater treatment facility. So with that, I'll invite the petitioner, Mr. Gray, to give an overview of the project, their interest in this site. At the end, I have another slide just to kind of bring back for discussion purposes the main points from there as far as to assist with the discussion this evening. So if there's, I'll hand the microphone over to Mr. Gray. If there's any questions of staff for him throughout the process, we're happy to answer.
Good evening. Is that on?
Yeah, you just got to get it close to you.
Okay, great.
There
Thank
go.
you. Terrific.
There.
Well, thank you. Thank you for taking the time this evening. Appreciate it. I realize it's a beautiful evening out there, so I'll do my best for brevity tonight. Brian's has been terrific to work with on this. Really appreciate that. We've actually been involved with the property going back to 2013, the ownership of 10.5 acres of the 17-acre parcel, roughly, plus or minus 17-acre parcel. So the this project summary, I can just hit a few of the high points on that. The overall concept that we're looking at with the project is to try and really address some of this issue of some of the demographics and as they're changing. You know, it seems as we analyze other projects and look at different market studies and such, that there tends to be this need for some slightly smaller units. So rather than just the single-family residences that you see or the smaller townhome, freestanding townhome units, there's also this need for some slightly smaller residences as well. And so as we're looking at this project, and specifically looking at this as a phased approach, so that could change, you know, depending on some different aspects with the economy, which, you know, we don't have any kind of crystal ball with that. But the plan would be that it would probably be built out in phases. And so specifically looking at that as the first phase, the types of residences that might be slightly smaller, often referred to as this missing middle. So that's a quick overview on some of that. With regard to the actual site itself, we've spent a lot of time in the analysis of the existing site, looking at both the topography, doing some preliminary engineering, which Eric has helped us with some of that, and we've had a civil engineer involved with some of that work also. And it really is a magnificent site and has the benefit of the two adjacent properties as well, being the nature preserve as well as the golf course. So I think those are nicely done. So looking at the slide here, at the upper portion of the slide is the site there. And then the actual, so the 17 acres is the full rectangle. The portion that we control is the 10.5 acres, which is actually where the Rivers Bend restaurant was, and another single-family residence that was adjacent to the golf course. So next slide. Again, just pulling that in a little bit tighter. And then that next slide, Brian. So this is just a quick analysis. Again, we've done quite a few different studies on this. This one very much driven by some of the analysis of the topography and the way that the site relates to different aspects. For instance, currently, if members know the site well enough where the Rivers Bend restaurant is, if you're pulling out of that driveway, you're seeing the hill there. So immediately to your south, it's a little bit of a dangerous situation there, particularly as people, I think, probably tend to be traveling a little bit faster these days. And so we've moved, towards this idea of taking most of that traffic off to the north there onto Hickory Nut Grove Lane, which you can see in the sketch there. And then part of the way that this has been laid out also has to do with some of the historic trees in that circular area that you see in the colored portion. There's actually a white oak tree there. The arborist has defined as probably being a 150, 200-year-old tree. So we're really trying to base a lot of what we're doing around that. And then we'll get into this a little bit further too as we get into the project. But we're often also trying to analyze pervious space to impervious space. So the amount of green space versus the amount of space that is not going to allow any kind of ground water to infiltrate the site. And so part of that's driving how we're looking at designing some of these things as well. So, with regard to the architecture, this is all very preliminary. But again, I'm guessing that you've probably seen some of the narrative as well, so went into a little bit more detail in the narrative with that as well. But again, trying to put forward something here that would endure well long-term, that would speak to some of the other historic aspects and some of the other properties that are even nearby to this site. Again, just showing how some of those might relate. And this is just a sample slide of some of the different projects that we've been involved with. We're actually celebrating our 25th year in business. Cornish Rosen based here in the Barrington area primarily, but having had the opportunity to work in a lot of different parts of the world myself prior to the starting of the organization as well. And again, back to that summary. So,
Thank you, Mr. Gray. And the item, again, just for this evening, just to review, was the overall conceptual project concept from the standpoint of the process we would have to go through. Discussion points this evening is the annexation. Obviously, it's not within the Village of Cary as of today. It is identified in our comprehensive plan as a property that is appropriate for annexation. Looking at the potential housing mixture and the type of project as proposed, seeking the more of the multifamily housing type, with the footprint as identified in the project. The narrative did include some information on proposed density, possibly for the max density for the site, and the petitioner can provide some additional information as far as how they're looking at the density from the project there. But also looking at the potential need for the utility improvements on the property. There may even need to be a need for a special service area to help finance or fund those items. So, and then if there's other concerns that the board may have as well, we certainly can have those for review this evening. But those are the main points, just to kind of help guide discussion this evening related to the project.
Anybody have any immediate questions regarding this?
Well, I'll start. I love the idea of you making sure that you're incorporating the current, the mature trees out there and wanting to keep them for whatever type of development comes out there at some point. So I'm pleased to hear that. I'm pleased to hear that you're thinking it through and saying, hey, it's not necessarily safe to be coming out to Rawson Bridge Road, that Hickory Nut Grove is the way to go. So I like your foresight with some of these things. As for the density and some of that stuff, I think we can get into once you get further along in the process. Do we have a need for some of these types of living arrangements in Cary? I think we do. We've talked numerous times that we have a lot of population aging and that they want to age in place. And they don't want those 2,000-plus square foot properties. You know, they're looking for something a little bit smaller. So I love the concept. I like the idea. I would absolutely, if we're going to do a project there, I want to annex it in. I definitely want to have that come in if we proceed with that. So from an initial standpoint, you know, I think there's a lot of details that we need to get into at some point, but if you're looking for just a preliminary discussion, I like the concept. I think there's a need for the concept.
Anybody else?
Well, so I would echo a lot of what Trustee McAlpine said, especially about the tree you tried to preserve and the safety aspect. I am concerned about the density. I think the density is high. I'm looking at some of these other properties we have listed here, and the density is much lower, and I even think those areas are already pretty dense. So when you look at where this subject property would rank compared to the others, that would be my biggest concern, I suppose. And then I know we'd get into other discussions about the exterior and everything else, but looking at some of the properties you showed right after you showed this property look different than this property, and there's certain aspects, architectural aspects, that I'd like to better on some of the other pictures you showed. So that's my initial thoughts.
Could I just speak to the
Sure,
density
absolutely.
aspect for a second? So I don't disagree with that. However, and Brian and I had some back and forth on some of this even just very recently. I think it's important, and I think that this type of a graph can be, or chart, can be somewhat misleading because if a unit is a large unit, you know, say it's you know, very generous unit, attached unit, you know, it could be, you know, 2,600, 3,200 square feet. I mean, it could be a large unit, or it could be a very small unit, you know, 700 square foot, 800 square foot, it could be a very small unit. They all show up on a chart like that as a dwelling unit, right? And your acre is always the same size, obviously. And so I think that sometimes that can be a little bit misleading because, you know, for instance, some of the you know, the initial studies that we've done on this, a dwelling unit might only occupy something like say, you know, a little over 400 square foot of lot coverage, you know, if you're actually stacking the units and as they're going together. Whereas, you know, a traditional townhome unit, you know, say it's a 26 by 56 unit or so, you know, that might represent something like 1,450 square feet of coverage on that lot. You know, that's before you get into your driveways and all the rest. So you start doing an analysis on your pervious versus your impervious, and you're looking at your green space and the amount of green space you're going to have and the amount of impact you're going to have with that stormwater. Because, you know, and there's others in the room that are more knowledgeable about this than I am, but I've spent plenty of time with civil engineers and stormwater and chambers and vaults and all those kinds of things. And it becomes a pretty significant aspect. So that's the only thing that I might throw out with regard to that is I agree. I think that that's a very important concept to be analyzing, but I think it's important to analyze it in the context of what's your pervious and impervious as well, if we're really trying to evaluate.
And so with the 285 units, would they all have garages for the units?
That would still be to be determined.
Okay.
But I think the way that our initial analysis was, as we ran some very preliminary pro formas, is trying to get the analysis to work out so that each unit could have at least one car garage. And again, you know, as we look at this and as we look as a phase A and trying to execute a phase A, and if that's just say that 5.5 acres or so at the corner there of Rawsonbridge Road and the Hickory Nut Grove, you know, that's where we could see something where maybe it has a little bit more density there, a few more units there, but then as you go into the site, particularly as you would go to the south and as you go to the east, you know, then that's where it may make more sense for there to be slightly larger units that have a little bit different characteristic to them. So, and we see that as well. You know, not necessarily, one of the examples that we were citing is not the idea of just trying to come out and do every single unit so that it looks the same. You know, having that diversity, you know, so that there's that the buildings are sympathetic. You know, the different types of units could be sympathetic to one another, so that there's, you know, as you'd want a neighborhood to have, but not necessarily doing it in such a way that, you know, it looks like they're just getting, you know, coming out of a factory or being punched out that way. So.
Just as a reminder, if the trustees, can we talk into the microphone, please? You got to get real close.
Okay.
There you go. Thank you. Because we've had to go back and listen to some recordings lately, and when you're sitting back like this, no one can pick it up. So just thank you very much. Actually, Jake had the longer microphones installed here to try to encourage that. Trustee Dudek, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I do. I guess I would echo comments made by everyone so far. I do think that's a great location for residential. I think that it is, the way you've proposed it is way too dense. I do recall, I don't know if it's 10, 12 years ago, but it was quite some time ago. It sounds like perhaps before you were involved in the property, there was a project proposed for that site. And I want to say it was less than 100 units, maybe 60. And I can't, for the life of me, figure out how in the world you could put as many units and parking and open space on this site and leave the amount of trees that are there. So those are my initial thoughts. I also did go to your website and I watched the YouTube video, and I said, that's a vision I have for Maplewood. And if that's what you're building, then have you thought about Maplewood?
I don't think that was necessarily our website. I don't think
It's the one that's connected in the information that we got. I went to,
I think that's the.
you have a minute, like a 30-minute.
I think
minute.
that's the one in Omaha.
Yeah, it's you referenced some other projects, so they're looking to
Right.
mirror the examples. It's not
Yeah.
the ones that they specifically worked on, but are examples of a vision that they might be looking for.
Right. I'm not suggesting here, but when I saw from their website the project that you reference here
Yeah.
in Omaha, there's no trees on it. Buildings are different looking, and to me, that's ideal for another site we have in town, but not here.
I think those are all fair comments. And I am familiar with that plan, and it actually goes back to pre-2005. But I think you'd be surprised if we did the analysis on the pervious versus impervious, how close we would be. In fact, we recently did this on a similar project, and we were about 12% greater. So instead of like a 35% impervious, we were at 43%. So I hear what you're saying, and I appreciate that, but it actually does, you know, and I don't want to repeat myself, but it really does, it's important to get to the details, I think, when we really start to analyze that.
I did have one other comment, because there's something in the presentation that I never heard of. What is sustainable development or architecturally integrated subdivision requirements? I've never heard that before.
That's a provision within our subdivision regulations. So a development can be designed in a way that preserves open space as much as possible. And then you have a more dense project in the areas that do get developed as a result. The Foxford Hills subdivision is an example of one that we've approved that way. So the golf course area is preserving more of an open space area, and then the lots that are in the subdivision are slightly smaller than what our code will allow. So it allows more of a cluster development design.
So does the gentleman achieve that perhaps by multiple levels or something like that, so you can get the density but not the ground.
Correct. Yeah, there's multiple ways. Yeah, so if you're trying to preserve as many of the existing trees on the property, if they're healthy and strong, and if you have a stand of oak trees in a portion of the site that you don't want to develop, you can increase the density elsewhere on the site to preserve that natural areas.
Okay, thank you.
Ryan, what is our height right now limit for buildings?
It depends on what the zoning classification would be for the
So
property.
what would this property be
If
zoned?
it's R3, which is be a multifamily project, the maximum height is 30 feet to the midpoint of the
Three
roof.
stories?
Essentially, for any taller structure, that district does have a transitional setback as well, so you can go higher than the 30 feet, but then it requires a larger setback as well. So for every 1 foot you go above that 30 feet, you have to go back another 2 feet.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Weinhammer?
Go ahead.
I just have a quick question. What is your target market for this? For this development, do you have a target market of who you're looking to serve?
We tend to think very long-term. So the simple answer is not really. We're really trying to, create something that we think is going to endure well long-term. And so we think that that does have a very broad basis. We certainly, at this point, are not targeting a particular segment like a senior element of the population. In fact, we tend to think opposite of that. We actually tend to want to see something that's more integrated. So,
Okay.
yeah.
These would be all units that are sold, correct?
We tend, again, kind of thinking long-term and seeing how things go through cycles, we tend to try and design and build things in such a way that we're complying with our zoning requirements. But then in terms of the ownership structure, again, we try to be somewhat agnostic about that. And some of that, particularly with the economic cycles that we're dealing with, we think that's a pretty good strategy.
Right, so there would be not rental units, there would be for sale.
They could be rental units, and we certainly wouldn't want it to be a situation, and we have faced this some, where if they are indeed units that are bought primarily by individual owners, that there would be any kind of a restriction on those owners to rent them out, which, there's starting to become more of that around the country now as well, and I think that can sometimes be problematic as well. So again, we tend not to try and, we tend not to go there. We tend to try and have the buildings built in such a way so that all the utilities are separate, right? So there's no issue with that, and sometimes that requires another level of detail in terms of how they're built.
So
But-
right, no common areas, that's a shared cost or anything like that, just individual units?
Well, there can be common areas. Certainly with the circulation, there's often common areas. There's certainly a trend. In fact, Trustee Dudek, the project that you referenced, one of the things that they really tout because of COVID is the idea of exterior entrances for everyone. We think that might be a little bit of a stretch. There's not a lot of historical precedence for that, and that creates a lot of additional infrastructure for everyone to have their own exterior entrance. So,
Trustee Walrath, are you still with us?
I am. I appreciate the opportunity, Mayor.
Sure.
Looking at the charts that we've been discussing, it seems density is one of the big topics. The chart that is provided, I will agree with the earlier comments that it can be a little bit misleading. But either way, whether you're measuring it via the number of units, the lot size, the density per acres, this is going to be one of the top developments we've seen in Cary in a long time. I would say that initially I'm leaning more towards being in favor of the higher density because of the location of the property. We have to the south, Foxford Hills, the golf course driving range, and to the west, the McHenry County Conservation District. So there's open space in an area that's going to be continually open space next to the property. So in my mind, that lends this to being a little bit more of an open feel if you have a higher density. So I'm not quite as concerned as we might normally be with an in-town development. As Trustee McAlpine said earlier, I'm very much in favor of having traffic not come and go on Rawson Bridge, as there's a very high volume of traffic there already. So I'm encouraged by the current state of the proposals they put out, and I look forward to seeing more updated ones as we get a little further down the road.
Thank you. Trustee Weinhammer?
So I'm a very visual person, so I think something that would help me as you guys go down further is maybe like a 3D graphic showing, like, you know, the trees and the property, and exactly kind of more so how things would be on the property.
There were almost some drone footage that came into the presentation tonight, but it just wasn't good enough, so it didn't make the cut. So, but I appreciate that, yes.
I'm not 100% sure when you're talking about kind of being fluid with whether it's going to be owner occupied or rental. I'm still not quite sure. I mean, is everyone else I'm a little confused by what you were saying. I'm not trying to hold you to anything, but you know, I look at things, and if you have a development with a, you know, almost like a condo type of thing, if you were going to sell them, you have to make sure that they're going to be able to be financed if you're going to be selling them. So I mean, I don't know what you mean by you're going to be kind of fluid with it. It's kind of, yes, we're going to sell them, or no, we're going to rent them, or as a developer, we're going to hold X amount and rent those out and then make everyone else purchase them. It's a little bit ambiguous to me, if that makes sense. I don't know if anyone else is feeling that way, but I was a little confused with your answer.
Sure. Well, first of all, apologies for the
No, that's okay.
confusion. That's not.
That could be all on me.
It's not the intention. So I'll try to explain it slightly differently. And again, so much of it is driven by the economy,
right?
The way that we tend to look at it is we tend to segregate it, right? So we have zoning issues, and then we have issues of ownership, right? And with regard to zoning, typically zoning's not necessarily going to restrict whether or not it's a for sale unit or it's a rental unit, right? I mean, that's usually handled through some kind of an HOA process, or it's handled through something else. And if, you know, particularly if you look at historic properties, you know, particularly in the city of Chicago, you know, I lived in London for a number of years. So often we were working on properties that were, you know, 300 years old, and they would go through these cycles, you know, where they may be, it may be an owner-occupied property for a period of time, and then it may be a rental property for a period of time, and then maybe an owner-occupied again. And then depending upon where we're at in the cycle has such a big impact on that. So for instance, often when people build apartment buildings for a rental purpose, they won't segregate the utilities, right? Because there's a cost involved in that. There's things. When we get involved in a project like this, we'll typically segregate our utilities, right? Because that's a cost that you then don't have to try and deal with down the road. So, you know, again, we wouldn't necessarily be in favor of restricting what could happen with the properties, if that helps.
So yeah, just kind of wait and see where you're at. But the bottom line is you're going to set it up so that everything is segregated. So each is individually set up. So no matter what you want to do, you can change midstream if the economy if it dictates that, hey, people are buying again because, you know, whatever's going on, or vice versa.
Yeah, and again, and I don't mean to drag this out, but you know, but we do again, we think very long term. You know, working on buildings, and you know, and even looking at buildings in this part of the world, and some of the history that there are with some of the buildings, and these can often be very simple buildings, but if they're taken care of and they're well maintained, I mean, a building can easily last, you know, 150, 200 years is not a stretch anymore at all, and it's realistic to think that in that period of time, that a property will potentially go through some different ownership, particularly when it's built in this kind of a fashion. So.
Anybody else? A couple things I'll throw at you too.
Sure.
Thank you very much for coming to the village. This is a great opportunity, I think, for us. The years that I've lived here and on that side of town, I've really thought that would be a perfect opportunity for, more of an upscale luxury type of a development over there. Throughout my travels throughout the community, I'm hit all the time with people my age wanting to downsize, and there's nowhere for them to go. And I think this is something that I've talked about with staff. I've talked about this, going way back to our comprehensive plan, that this particular parcel would be well suited for kind of like a mixed use residential that would incorporate, I don't want to use the word condo, but nice apartments that would be surrounded by perhaps some townhomes, single-family attached duplexes, these things. We don't have anything like that right now that's newer that people are looking for. Regarding the density, I think the density is a little high. I'm willing to look at opportunities there, in my opinion, that are a little bit more on the higher density. But if you look at, what we've been dealing with lately is our Maplewood property, which is in the downtown district. Mm-hmm. That's got a different type of a feel of demographics that would be attracted to that. So I wouldn't mind the density that they have been proposed. Mm-hmm. For this particular project, I think, scaling that back a little bit to Trustee Cavelli's opinion about maybe some different types of architectural features that are there that would attract people there. Mm-hmm. But I would like to see a majority of the units be owner-occupied. Especially on that side of town, because we don't have any rentals on that side of town. I am not against having rental units on that particular the property, but as Trustee McAlpine noted, that she reiterated actually about each individual unit that you have there would have their own utilities and their own, electric boxes, water service, and that stuff. So they can be, I know that there are developers that will hold back some units and rent them out. Mm-hmm. I don't know what your long-term plan is. Do you plan on holding this? Would there be an HOA? How would this property be managed in general? Or, will you hire a property manager? How is that going to work?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it is really a little bit too early for us to be making that decision. And part of that is driven by, and again, it's a little bit of a chicken and egg, but part of it is driven by, what will be allowed to do there. With it being the requirement of being annexed in, and presuming that it is a planned development approach, we're not necessarily able to be purely conscriptive with that zoning. Mm-hmm.
Well, the reason I ask that is I think that we need to be clear from the get-go what direction you are taking this. I don't want you to get, say everything moves forward and then halfway through you're going to say, well, I'm going to make these all rental. Mm-hmm. I don't think that the board, I think that we would kind of like to know what your vision is for the property.
Right. I'm second generation in owning property. We have a portfolio that we look after, and had we not gone through, the recession at the turn of the century and then through 2008, I would be in a much better position to be able to give you an answer on that. But with the variability that we have, it's really hard. It's really hard. And I can just tell you from other projects that we've been involved with, it's really hard to make that kind of a determination too early on in the process.
I understand where you're coming from, but for instance, when we can only deal with what we know already, what's come before us, like the Maplewood project. Everybody that's come towards us said it's 100% rental. They don't even want to talk about owner-occupied. So right. I'm looking for like a commitment like that, and we've touched a little bit about, I know this is a very high-level, 30,000-foot kind of thing. You're looking for our feedback, but I'm just kind of giving you some of the details that the board in the past has been looking for.
Yeah.
Like the garages and that thing, people that are expected to want a garage. So how would you handle that?
Right. Well, again, to kind of give you an answer, if you wanted an answer to that, we would be opposed to saying, oh, it's only going to be for sale. Mm-hmm. Because where we're at right now in the economic environment, there's no comparison. There's no comparison, right? The rental is so much further ahead of where a for sale product is right now. But as we're looking at developing this over a phased, period of time, that could change. That could change pretty quickly. And we've seen it change. And so again, I think there's a benefit, again, I don't have a crystal ball, but I think that there's a lot of people that are very bullish right now on multifamily. And I don't know if that's always going to be the case. So.
Trustee Walrath, do you have any other questions?
I don't. I would just, thank you, Mayor. I'd make a comment to say that I can appreciate our guests coming and being forward with us on not having a specific plan at the moment, but I would also say that these are some of the most pertinent questions that we have as far as ownership and rental. So I would think that before we get to an approval standpoint, we would have to have a pretty firm answer on some of those questions.
Thank you. Any other trustees have any comments, questions?
I appreciate you coming forward. I like the information that you shared with us, the other properties that you allowed us to look at where you've been trying to emulate. So I would love to see you be able to move a little forward and see if we can't make this work.
I agree. I think it's a great opportunity. It's a great parcel, a great area that needs some more density over there. So I think that's a good opportunity. So I think you've got pretty much the feedback from everybody here. Is there any questions that you have for us?
Well, one thing that might be useful to touch on is just this whole idea of the phased approach, because that's something we'd be very interested in. We've done enough preliminary engineering that we think that we could do a first phase with an initial SSA to get the infrastructure in. And while there's benefit for getting everything planned, the full 17 acres, there's also benefit for us just being able to move forward. So that's a question that I'd put out there as well. In terms of the phased approach, is there I think, Brian, maybe I'll start with you, Brian. I think your preference is we just do the whole 17 acres and then we know and we've got it and we're working on it on that basis.
Yeah, I think from what we've discussed in the past was looking at the annexation would incorporate the entire 17 acres being annexed as a whole. So try to get the 3 property owners or individuals as part of the annexation. As part of the PUD approvals, certainly that can include multiple phases in a plan. So that if phase 1 is, say, 10 acres is for the size of the property, that's planned and laid out, and then there's a construction schedule for that, and then the 2 future phases or 1 future phase, whatever it is, can also be part of that PUD plan, but there can be a future timeline for when that may or may not occur. So I think for the zoning entitlements, it certainly can have that all reviewed and approved as one project, and then as multiple phases occur, there's timing mechanisms that could be in the approvals for that.
Right.
So with the phased approach, how would you handle it as a developer if we had another 2007, 2008, and you had only phase 1 done? What would your typical decision process look like when the world is falling apart?
Well, that's a great question, and that's why we're so interested in phases, because we don't really have any interest in going out and putting 17 acres of infrastructure in this market because of the what we consider to be the absorption velocity of sales or occupancy. So the simple answer to your question is we try not to do it. We try to segregate it in such a way that you're not putting all that infrastructure in the ground, because that's where it kills you.
So you sort of end where the phase 1 boundary might be and wait till whatever happens for phase 2 or 3 and then reconnect to those utilities? Is that what you're kind of describing?
Yes. It's a little more complicated than that.
Yeah. So from
Yeah, in
a
layman's terms.
yeah, from a site layout standpoint, if it's done in phases, we would look for, from a planning perspective, that each phase can stand on its own. So if phase 1 occurs, that the utilities are in place that can serve that project, and they could be expanded upon for future phases. So that if it is 2 phases or 3 phases, that there may be an overall plan to show how all that utility would work together in the initial approvals. But the first phase on itself would be able to stand alone, so that if economy changes or you know, the project changes in the future, if they want, you know, whatever housing type is proposed or approved here, if, you know, 20 years from now, if that changes, you know, what the market dictates, there's the ability to amend that plan as well to modify the future phases. So I think it's more, phase approach is certainly doable. It's just the plan that would go through the zoning process would need to have, as part of the PUD process, that initial phase planned out, what's included in that, and then have some preliminary items for the future phases to be incorporated as well.
Okay. So then, and maybe I missed it, you described it earlier, and I apologize if you did. Do you own just the northwest corner, or do you own all 17 acres?
Our group owns 10.5 acres. So if we go back to that other slide, there's a small parcel on, and we've talked to both the other owners. So there's a small, so that's the 3 that you see. So there's a small parcel there on South Rosslyn Ridge Road.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the other nearly square rectangular portion at the northeast corner of the 17 acres. And we don't own that parcel either.
So the 2 corners you do not own?
Correct. Correct. Well, yeah, technically we own the southwest because we have an access route there, but effectively.
So, yeah, you own
Right,
this,
yeah.
right.
And that small piece cutting through?
So, what is your feeling about the assuredness that you're gonna be able to buy those other 2 parcels if your phase 1 is successful?
Well, we wouldn't proceed without having some kind of an option agreement in place. Typically. I mean, that's typically how we do it, but it's, every project is different. But if we go back to the other slide, that's in color. Yeah, so what's in color, we would see as phase 1. And so we could still execute without ever acquiring the other 2 parcels, which that's just part of real life. But in a, you know, in a perfect world, we would, and we've had conversations, so it's not like anybody's trying to hold out. I mean, they're both interested in, you know, they're both interested in highest and best use for their parcels as well, right? So in a perfect world, we would start with that as phase A. We'd have options in place on those other 2, and then we would just go through the project and develop it. And, you know, if we don't see another 2008, we just keep building it out as we go.
Anybody else have any? I have a question with regarding when you would go to the zoning and you have the different phases, would you present something to them to show what your finished 17 acres would look like? And then you would parcel off the various phases and figure out where the utilities would be and how you would be able to move forward with those? That is something that you're willing to do at this time?
Yeah, the simple answer is yes on that. Yeah, and that makes the most sense. I mean,
well, it's just, you know, when you're looking at a project like this and you're looking at the phase, you want to make sure that we know exactly what we would be getting in your first phase. And then this picture, if you've explained it better, that you could see the access point at the lower, that you can get to that bottom part of yours, that could be a phase 2. And just out of curiosity, the parcel owners that are adjacent to your property, are they willing to negotiate with you? Are they willing to sell their property, or is that something that they're just?
Oh yeah, part of those other 2 on part of the 17 acres. Oh yeah, very much.
Okay.
Very much so. Yeah, yeah. It's the best exit for them as well. So.
Good.
I think just an example for the board. Correct me if I'm wrong, Director Simmons, but when we had Cary Grove Park, that was all annexed into the Village of Cary, and then they had phases. So they just completed the phase here with the Aquatic Center, but they got approval for the zoning process for those other phases. So we could see something similar here of annexing the whole property, having those phases built into through the zoning process.
Makes sense.
I'd like to see the whole property come into the village at the same time.
And that's why we presented it this way, rather than in a piecemeal fashion. And, more information, as we're looking at things, we've done some preliminary engineering on a sanitary lift station. So we would size the sanitary lift station so that it could do the whole site.
Right.
Just prudent.
So on phase one, on 10, this colored spot is not 10 acres. That looks like it's about half of it, right?
5.5, yes.
How many units would be on there, roughly?
So again, we're just putting those numbers together where it worked out to roughly 18 per acre, roughly. So, whatever the math is on that, almost no, more than that, almost 100.
Closer to 100.
Yeah.
Okay. I
Yeah,
think
'cause
that's
you would-
interesting for the board to hear based on other conversations that we've had.
Well, he did mention that that would be the most dense part of the property.
Well, and if we could just go, and sorry to keep everyone here so long, but if we could go to that other elevation real quick, which is the next slide. So that's an 84 by 60 foot building, 3 stories. Probably because of the sloping site, would be able to have some parking below it, and that's 12 units. So you're talking about 4,800 square feet. You've got 12 units in that. It's only 400 square foot per unit of impervious surface for the building, right? Somebody comes in and builds a 26 foot by 56 foot 2-level townhouse. That's 1,450 square foot. So again, I don't mean to be, contrarian or contentious when it comes to dwelling unit versus acres, but it's really important. I think it's really important because what's happening, again, I'm getting on a soapbox, but what's happening is then we're building all these properties, but then you don't get the benefit. You don't get the benefit of the open space. You don't get the benefit of it being more pedestrian friendly because all of the, you see 90% of the townhouses that are built in Chicago area are designed so they can get a 2-car garage, right into the front of them. And if you do the analysis, I mean, the pervious versus impervious, and we do that internally, it's unbelievable. I mean, I find it unbelievable.
I think it's important for us, for me, there's no reason to apologize for that level of detail because it's important for us to understand that. We don't see these, we're not Schaumburg. We don't see these every other week. We see them once every 15 years, if that. And to understand the dynamics you go through as a developer and what the final project might look like for us is important. So, again, I'm just speaking for my own self. There is no reason to apologize for detail. In fact, I think most of us would appreciate that.
I agree.
Thanks for that.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Last thing on our committee is an update on the pre-final design of the future Civic Plaza improvements on the former depot building site. Director Morimoto, I think you got this.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. We're pleased to provide the committee an update on an ongoing project that's been going for quite some time. Not quite as long as the image you see here, which is from 1958, but it does give you a good sense of where we're coming from and where we're headed to in terms of the former Union Pacific Railroad depot site over in downtown. So kind of what we've been working on over the last several years, this project has had a variety of different inspirations. It first started back in 2016 as part of our Metro Station project. We did float out the concept of a festival street over on the former depot site, and it has evolved into part of our downtown strategic plan from 2021 and other preliminary engineering. We've improved our ability to 3D render, thankfully, over the years, but it did give a good idea of what this site could look like over the coming years. Our consultant did a great job of showing and connecting not just the site itself, but how it interacts with the whole downtown, and some of the goals and strategies that our project is meeting from that plan, specifically Goal 2, Strategy 2, enhancing our downtown's appearance and urban design character, and developing one or more outdoor plazas and gathering spaces. So with that, it has evolved into what's now our final design. It actually hasn't changed drastically from what you've seen in our previous CIP, capital improvement plan workshops and our budget process. More fine tweaking of the locations of the openings and the fences, the locations of the screen in the center of the shelter, the incorporation of covered bike parking as opposed to having it separate and outside the shelter in order to help position us better for future grant opportunities. But the core themes that we saw from the design that you've seen previously with the shelter, the artificial green areas and with the high quality synthetic turfs that are available, and the natural gas fireplace and sitting walls. All those elements have remained essentially intact from what you saw before. This is a before and after. This is actually very current from current. And of course, what we will see looking southward down the road. Right now, what we have with the demolition of the station complete, we do have that interim condition of the paved area or the former foundation. Until this project is built, we will be incorporating some long-term temporary fencing along that side. We just got approvals through an amendment to our existing agreements for maintenance in the parking lots with the railroad. So that'll be happening later this fall. And of course, evolving ultimately into the plaza that we just showed. Another angle in the interim condition with the kiss and ride parking remaining in the near term as 90-degree spaces. And of course, with the final product, it will turn into a kiss and ride lane. So in terms of our next steps, obviously in the orange there is where we're working on it right now. We're nearly complete with our consultant on final design. With the help of community development and our economic development team, we're going to continue pursuing grant funding. We are currently having a good lead on one funding source in particular with the Access to Transit grant. And then from there, we're also currently working on the various steps of a process you're aware of as well with the potential acquisition of property where this depot plaza will sit. And at that point, we're targeting entering the bidding phase in 2023 and hopefully still consistent with our original CIP plan, beginning construction in 2024 or so. So that's our update. Like I mentioned, it's not a lot of major changes, but I did want to put this before you since we're nearing the completion of final design and getting it ready to be shovel ready. So if you have any questions or comments, be happy to entertain them.
Anybody have any questions, comments?
I have one.
Yeah.
First of all, it looks fantastic. It's very exciting to see it moving along, so it looks great. But it's maybe a silly question, probably a pretty easy answer. So why are we doing a temporary fence instead of a permanent fence if it's going to be a permanent fence at some point?
When I say temporary, it's going to be the exact same aluminum fence that we
Okay.
actually are putting permanently on the south commuter lots, and it matches very closely to the existing black aluminum fence that's all along the parking lot there. That's there so that we might have some opportunities on that paved concrete area to utilize it. Because right now, just with wide open concrete, we can't really put tables there. We can't. We don't want to program it for uses without that safety factor just to contain it.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. Maybe I'm not asking correctly. Isn't it going to eventually, in the end product, have a permanent fence there?
Yes, you can see here. There's a fence
So it's
that
not going to be
was
the same place it would move, is what we're saying?
It'd
We-
be, yes, and that
Okay.
would be
Be moved.
constructed all at once.
That makes sense then. I was just trying to say, why are we putting temporary,
sure.
why don't we put a permanent to start off with? Okay.
Well, temporary, just so we could utilize the parcel now.
I get that completely. I do. I just,
And just as the board can remember, part of this, the funding of this comes from the generous donation from the Ganicki family, so.
And the fence, once the construction of the actual final plaza begins, that fencing will be removed and reutilized further south in the other
Perfect.
parking lots. It'll be surface mounted in a way that won't damage it.
thank you.
Sure.
Trustee Dudek, do you have a question?
No, it was an observation.
What's your observation?
I didn't see any bus barn in that picture.
We only have so many hours to 3D render. what we
3D.
can. Apologies.
Gosh, I hope so.
Yeah, let's hope.
Is that a promise?
All right, Eric, thank you very much. You and your
Awesome.
team, outstanding job,
amazing.
the whole staff. It's really put the board's vision into place. It's kind of exciting to see. I wish 2024 was here. No? Too quick? No, there's a lot, you know what, there is a lot of excitement downtown. I talk to people all the time, and they love the direction that we're going. Even the Cary sign is being well-received, so we're excited about that. I did. Anyway, I've had people that gave me grief about it before, just say they think it's great. So, anyway. Okay, nothing else on the agenda. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you, Trustee Walrath, for sticking with us.
Thank you, Mayor.